The torchlight flickers against the cold stone walls of a forgotten abbey, where a single monk hurriedly scribbles words onto parchment by the weak glow of his candle. Outside, the wind howls like a chorus of unseen voices, carrying secrets from a time when the world was still being mapped in the margins of manuscripts. This is the medieval era, a tapestry of shadow and light, where the line between fact and legend often blurred into mystery. For every grand castle or cathedral that still stands today, there are 100 riddles lost to time, whispers of events so strange they defy explanation. What if I told you that some of history's most jaw-dropping enigmas aren't tucked away in ancient Egypt or the jungles of the Maya, but hidden in plain sight, buried beneath the very soil of Europe's medieval past? Picture this, a village that vanished overnight, leaving nothing but empty homes and half-eaten meals. A knight's suit of armor discovered in a field, its wearer long gone, with no record of who he was or how he got there. A book written in a language no one has ever been able to decipher, its pages filled with bizarre illustrations of plants that don't exist. These aren't scenes from a fantasy novel. They're real, tangible mysteries from an age where the world was both expanding and contracting, where superstition and science walked hand in hand. For centuries, historians have grappled with these puzzles, peeling back layers of myth only to find more questions waiting underneath. And today, we're going to uncover 30 of the most haunting, most perplexing among them. But why do these medieval mysteries still captivate us? Perhaps because they remind us that even in an era we think we understand, there are gaps in the story, moments where history itself seems to hold its breath. These aren't just footnotes, they're windows into a world where the impossible felt within reach, where every shadow could hide a miracle or a menace. From vanishing armies to cursed relics, from towers built with no doors to maps that shouldn't have existed, each of these enigmas challenges what we think we know about the past. So grab your cloak and light your lantern. We're stepping into the unknown, retracing the steps of those who came before us, and uncovering the truths that time tried to bury. The journey begins now. In the twilight years of the 16th century, a group of English settlers arrived on the windswept shores of Roanoke Island, eager to carve out a new life in the untamed wilderness of the Americas. They built homes, planted crops, and even celebrated the birth of Virginia Dare, the first English child born on these distant shores. But when a supply ship returned 3 years later, the entire colony had vanished, not a soul remained. No signs of struggle, no graves, no hurried escape, just empty buildings and a single eerie clue, the word Croatoan carved into a tree. What happened to these people? Theories abound, each more haunting than the last. Some believe a devastating disease wiped them out, though the absence of bodies makes this unlikely. Others suggest they were slaughtered by hostile tribes, yet no evidence of violence was ever found. The most compelling explanation: they may have integrated with the nearby Croatoan people, a native tribe who had initially been friendly with the settlers. Yet even this theory leaves unanswered questions. Why leave behind everything? And why carve that single word as if it were a message meant for those who'd never understand? Then there are the darker whispers, tales of curses, of supernatural forces at play. Some claim the colonists angered local spirits or stumbled upon something best left undisturbed. After all, this was an age when the unknown was often explained through the lens of the uncanny. Whatever the truth, Roanoke stands as one of history's most chilling riddles, a ghost story without end, a vanishing act that still taunts us across the centuries. Could the answer lie buried in the soil of that lonely island, waiting for someone to uncover it? Or will the fate of those lost settlers remain forever trapped in the fog of time? The Voynich Manuscript isn't just a book. It's a labyrinth of ink and vellum that has defied understanding for over 500 years. Discovered in the early 20th century by a Polish book dealer named Wilfred Voynich, This peculiar volume dates back to the 15th century, filled from edge to edge with looping, alien script that no one has ever been able to read. But the writing is only half the mystery. Flip through its fragile pages and you'll find bizarre illustrations of plants that don't resemble any known species, intricate astronomical charts mapping unfamiliar constellations, and naked women bathing in what appears to be a network of green, interconnected tubes. What was the purpose of this book? Theories range from the scholarly to the sensational. Some believe it's an encrypted herbal manuscript created by medieval alchemists to protect secret knowledge. Others argue it might be an elaborate hoax, though carbon dating confirms its age, making the idea of a Renaissance-era prankster less likely. Then there are those who whisper of extraterrestrial origins or lost civilizations, pointing to the otherworldly quality of its illustrations. But the most tantalizing possibility, that it's written in a genuine yet utterly lost language, one that might rewrite our understanding of medieval science. Enter modern technology. In recent years, artificial intelligence has been thrown at the manuscript like a digital battering ram, with teams of researchers training algorithms to detect patterns in the text. Some claim to have identified fragments of Hebrew or Proto-Romance languages hidden in the script, while others argue the structure resembles a form of shorthand or cipher. Yet every supposed breakthrough crumbles under scrutiny, leaving the Voynich as stubbornly unreadable as ever. So why does this enigmatic book still haunt us? Perhaps because it represents the ultimate locked door, a puzzle without a key, a story we can't quite hear. In an age where information is at our fingertips, the Voynich Manuscript remains a defiant reminder that some secrets refuse to be uncovered. Will we ever crack its code, or will it continue to guard its mysteries, a silent sentinel from a time when the world was still full of uncharted corners? The village of Woolpit was a quiet corner of 12th century England, where life moved to the steady rhythm of harvests and church bells until the day two children wandered out of the wolf pits that gave the village its name. They would have been unremarkable save for one impossible detail. Their skin was a vivid, unnatural green. The boy and girl, dressed in strange clothing, spoke in a language no one recognized. Their appearance sent shockwaves through the countryside, sparking whispers of demons, fairies, and otherworldly visitors. But who were these children and where had they come from? At first, the villagers assumed the pair were starving, offering them bread and water. But the children refused to eat until someone brought them raw beans, which they devoured with desperate urgency. Over time, their green hue faded, and the girl, who survived longer than her brother, eventually learned enough English to tell a fragment of her story. She claimed they came from a place called St. Martin's Land, where the sun never rose and the light was perpetual twilight. She described a world separated from theirs by a great river, though she could never explain how they'd crossed it. Historians have wrestled with this account for centuries. Some argue the children were Flemish immigrants, possibly orphans fleeing persecution. Their green complexion the result of malnutrition or arsenic poisoning from contaminated food. The language barrier and unfamiliar clothing could easily have fueled the villagers' imaginations, twisting reality into something fantastical. Others, though, point to the girl's description of a sunless land, wondering if she might have been recounting a subterranean origin or something even more extraordinary. Could this be one of the earliest recorded encounters with beings not of this world? The Green Children of Woolpit straddle the line between folklore and historical record, a puzzle that refuses neat solutions. Whether victims of circumstance or visitors from another realm, their story lingers like an unanswerable riddle, a fleeting glimpse into a medieval world where the boundary between the possible and the impossible was far thinner than it is today. What do you think? Were they lost travelers, casualties of war, or something far stranger? The truth, much like the twilight land they described, remains just out of reach. The summer of 1518 in Strasbourg began like any other warm breezes rustling through the market square. the scent of fresh bread mingling with the murmur of daily life. Then, without warning, a woman named Frau Trophia stepped into the street and began to dance. Not the joyful steps of celebration, but a frenzied, uncontrollable jerking of limbs, her face twisted in exhaustion. She couldn't stop. Within days, dozens joined her, then hundreds, their bodies convulsing to a rhythm no one else could hear. The dancing plague had begun, a nightmare that would claim lives and defy explanation for centuries to come. What force could drive people to dance until their feet bled, until their hearts gave out? Theories range from the scientific to the supernatural. One of the most persistent explanations points to ergot poisoning, a fungus that grows on damp rye bread and produces chemicals similar to LSD. Ingest enough and hallucinations, seizures, and involuntary movements follow. Symptoms that align eerily with the accounts from Strasbourg. But here's the catch: ergotism typically causes gangrene and burning pain, not just dance. And why would it affect so many at once in such a specific, coordinated way? Then there's the psychological angle: mass psychogenic illness, a cascade of hysteria where the mind convinces the body of an affliction. Medieval Europe was no stranger to collective delusions, from demonic possession scares to witch trial frenzies. Strasbourg at the time was a tinderbox of stress, famine, disease, and crushing poverty had left the city desperate for relief. Could the dancing have been a physical manifestation of that collective despair? Contemporary records suggest authorities even hired musicians and built stages, believing the dancers needed to get it out of their system, a remedy that only fueled the fire. But what if the truth lies somewhere between biology and belief? Some researchers propose a perfect storm: malnourished bodies, susceptible minds, and perhaps a charismatic individual, Frau Trophia herself, unwittingly triggering a chain reaction. The human brain is wired to mirror others' movements, a survival mechanism that might have spiraled into tragedy. Or consider the religious context. This was an era when dance was both celebration and penance, with some Christian sects practicing ecstatic dancing to purge sin. Could the plague have started as a ritual gone horribly wrong? The strangest detail: this wasn't an isolated event. Similar outbreaks dotted medieval Europe from the 11th century onward, as if the continent periodically succumbed to an irresistible, invisible tempo. Yet Strasbourg's remains the most infamous, a grim reminder of how fragile the line between body and mind can be. Were these people poisoned, possessed, or simply pushed to the brink? The answer, like their movements, remains just out of reach, a macabre waltz of history that still haunts us today. Deep beneath the cobblestone streets of Moscow, hidden somewhere in the labyrinth of vaults and tunnels beneath the Kremlin, lies one of history's most tantalizing treasure hunts, the lost library of Ivan the Terrible. According to legend, this vast collection of ancient manuscripts was brought to Russia by Ivan's grandmother, Sophia Paleolog, a Byzantine princess who fled Constantinople before its fall in 1453. Among the treasures she supposedly carried with her were irreplaceable works from the Library of Alexandria, scrolls from ancient Rome, and even texts written in languages no one alive could translate. But after Ivan's death in 1584, the library vanished without a trace, leaving behind only cryptic references in old records and the whispers of treasure hunters obsessed with finding it. For centuries, the idea of this hidden trove has fueled expeditions, theories, and even outright obsession. In the late 19th century, a Russian archaeologist claimed to have uncovered a secret chamber beneath the Kremlin, only for his notes to mysteriously disappear shortly after. Decades later, during Soviet construction projects, workers reported discovering strange, walled-off passages, but investigations were abruptly halted by authorities. Even modern technology has failed to settle the debate. Ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging have revealed anomalies beneath the Kremlin's foundations, but whether these mark the library's resting place or just natural voids remains uncertain. Why has this library proven so elusive? Some argue it never existed at all, that the legend grew from exaggerated accounts of Ivan's personal collection. Others suggest it was deliberately hidden or destroyed to protect its contents. After all, Ivan earned his fearsome reputation for a reason. What if the texts contained knowledge deemed too dangerous for the world? There's a chilling theory that the library might hold heretical Christian gospels, suppressed scientific treatises, or even maps revealing lands unknown to medieval Europe. Then there's the most intriguing possibility of all, that the library still exists waiting silently beneath the Kremlin's walls. Modern searches have been complicated by politics and the sheer density of Moscow's underground infrastructure, but the lure remains. Could the next breakthrough come from a stray document in an overlooked archive or a forgotten tunnel rediscovered by accident? Until then, the lost library of Ivan the Terrible stands as a ghost of knowledge, a reminder of how much history might still be buried literally just out of reach. In the shadowed heart of London's Tower, two young princes once played beneath the arches of power until they vanished without a trace. Edward V, just 12 years old, and his 10-year-old brother Richard of Shrewsbury were the heirs to England's throne in 1483, their futures bright with promise. Then came their uncle, Richard III, a man whose name would become forever tangled with their disappearance. He declared the boys illegitimate, seized the crown for himself, and locked them within the Tower of London, a fortress that had long been both palace and prison. Weeks passed, the princes were seen less and less, then not at all. Whispers of murder slithered through the court, but without bodies, without proof, the truth dissolved into legend. Centuries later, in 1674, workers renovating the tower made a grisly discovery: a wooden chest buried beneath a staircase containing two small skeletons. The bones were hastily reburied as those of the lost princes, but without modern science, the identification remained speculative. It wasn't until 1933 that the remains were exhumed and examined by forensic experts. The skeletons belonged to children roughly the same ages as the princes, with the elder showing signs of a jaw deformity consistent with historical accounts of Edward. But here's where the mystery deepens. The bones also displayed strange markings, nicks and fractures that some argue could indicate violent suffocation, the method rumored to have been used. Others counter that the damage could have occurred post-mortem during centuries of improper storage. The debate rages on. Richard's defenders point to the lack of definitive proof, arguing that the Tudor dynasty, which overthrew him, had every reason to smear his name. After all, history is written by the victors, and the Tudors painted Richard as a monster to legitimize their own rule. Some even suggest the princes might have been secretly spirited away, their deaths staged to avoid endless plots to restore them. But if they lived, why did neither ever step forward to claim their birthright? Modern technology could hold the key. Recent calls for DNA testing have been met with resistance, as the bones now rest in Westminster Abbey, their sanctity guarded by the Church of England. Without fresh analysis, the tower's darkest secret remains locked in the past. Were the princes victims of ruthless ambition, casualties of a kingdom's brutal politics? Or does the truth lie somewhere in the gaps of history, waiting for science to pry it loose? For now, their fate lingers in the realm of the unproven, a tragedy wrapped in silence, buried beneath the weight of 500 years. In the shadow of the Apennine Mountains, where the mists cling to the valleys like whispered secrets, there stood an ancient walnut tree in Benevento, a tree unlike any other. According to medieval chronicles, this was no ordinary plant but the gathering place of witches, a site where the boundaries between our world and something far darker blurred into nothingness. Every Thursday night, or so the stories claimed, women from across Italy would anoint their bodies with a mysterious unguent, mount broomsticks or goats, and fly through the night to convene beneath its gnarled branches. There they would feast, dance, and pledge allegiance to the devil himself. But what made Benevento's walnut tree so special? The answer lies in a tangled knot of pagan survival and Christian fear. Long before the Church's dominance, the region was sacred to the Lombards, a Germanic tribe who worshipped a serpent god beneath those very trees. When Christianity arrived, the old beliefs didn't vanish. They went underground, resurfacing in distorted forms. The Church, ever vigilant against heresy, recast these lingering traditions as diabolical, turning veneration into witchcraft. The walnut tree became a symbol of everything they sought to eradicate, a living testament to the past's stubborn refusal to die. The stories from Benevento didn't just stay local. They seeped into the broader European imagination, fueling the fire of witch trial hysteria. Inquisitors cited Benevento as proof of a vast satanic conspiracy, pointing to the walnut tree gatherings as evidence that witches operated in organized covens. This idea that witchcraft was a networked rebellion against God justified the brutal persecutions that followed. The Malleus Maleficarum, the infamous witch-hunting manual, even referenced Benevento's legends, weaving them into its paranoid narrative. Yet beneath the terror lies a haunting question. Was there any truth to these tales? Some historians argue the witches might have been midwives or healers, women who preserved pre-Christian herbal knowledge. Their flying ointments, often made from hallucinogenic plants like belladonna, could have induced trance-like states, making their nocturnal gatherings seem supernatural to outsiders. Others suggest the entire phenomenon was a mix of mass delusion and political scapegoating, a way to explain misfortune or suppress dissent. The walnut tree itself is long gone, chopped down by church authorities in the early modern era. But its legacy lingers, a reminder of how easily folklore can curdle into fear and how the unknown can be weaponized. Benevento's witches never signed pacts in blood or danced with demons, yet their story helped shape centuries of persecution. Was it all a lie, a misunderstanding, or something stranger still? The tree may have fallen, but its shadow still stretches across history. The flames licked higher around Jacques de Molay's feet as the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar stood chained to the stake on that frigid March evening in 1314. The air reeked of burning timber and charred flesh, but it was his voice, hoarse yet unwavering, that struck fear into the crowd gathered on Paris's Isle aux Juifs. God knows who is wrong and has sinned, he declared, his gaze locking onto King Philip IV and Pope Clement V, the men who had orchestrated the Templars' downfall. Soon misfortune will come to those who have condemned us to death. Then came the curse, uttered with such conviction that even the executioners hesitated. Within a year, I summon you both to meet me before God's tribunal. What happened next was either the most chilling coincidence in medieval history or proof that curses carry weight. Pope Clement died a month later, his body ravaged by dysentery so severe that contemporary chroniclers claimed he vomited his soul out. Philip followed within 8 months, succumbing to a stroke during a hunting trip after reportedly seeing visions of Molay's ghost. The king's demise sparked rumors of a Templar revenge plot, with whispers that loyalists had poisoned him. But the strangeness didn't stop there. Over the next decade, Philip's 3 sons, Louis, Philip, and Charles, all died young and childless, extinguishing the Capetian dynasty in what became known as the Curse of the Templars. Even the executioner who lit Molay's pyre was said to have gone mad, confessing to hearing the Grand Master's voice in his dreams. Modern scholars offer more earthly explanations: stress-induced illness, medieval Europe's rampant diseases, the brutal politics of the era. Yet the timing remains unsettlingly precise. The Templars themselves had been destroyed under equally bizarre circumstances. Once Christendom's most powerful order, bankers to kings and guardians of holy relics, they were arrested en masse on Friday the 13th in 1307, an origin for the superstition we still whisper about today. Their trials were kangaroo courts fueled by Philip's greed for their wealth and Clement's fear of their influence. Under torture, Templars confessed to heresy, spitting on crosses, and worshipping a mysterious head called Baphomet, claims historians now widely dismiss as coerced fiction. Which brings us to the conspiracy theories. Some insist the surviving Templars went underground, forming secret societies like the Freemasons to preserve their knowledge and their vengeance. Legends swirl of hidden treasure, from the Ark of the Covenant to the Holy Grail, smuggled away before the arrests. Others claim Molay's curse echoes through history, pointing to the French Revolution as divine return when Louis XVI, a descendant of Philip, was guillotined near the very spot where Molay burned. Even today, Templar symbols appear in unexpected places, from Scottish graveyards to Dan Brown novels, feeding speculation that the order never truly died. Was Molay's curse mere theatrical defiance, or did something unimaginable unfold in those final moments? Perhaps the truth lies in the psychology of guilt. Philip reportedly suffered nightmares before his death, haunted by his role in the Templars' destruction. In an age where belief in divine justice was absolute, even a king's conscience could become a lethal weapon. Whatever the case, the Templars' legacy endures, a tangled web of fact and folklore that challenges us to question where history ends and legend begins. 5 centuries later, their story still holds power because some mysteries refuse to stay buried, just like the embers of that long cold pyre. Beneath the flickering torchlight of a Bohemian monastery in the early 13th century, a lone monk sat hunched over a desk, his quill scratching furiously across the page. The task before him was impossible: to produce the world's largest medieval manuscript in a single night, or face execution for breaking his monastic vows. As the hours slipped away, legend claims he made a desperate pact, invoking the devil himself to finish the work. The result, the Codex Gigas, or Devil's Bible, a tome so massive it required 2 people to lift, and so unsettling it features a full-page portrait of Satan himself glaring from its vellum leaves. Standing nearly 3 feet tall and weighing over 160 pounds, the Codex Gigas is a behemoth of knowledge and mystery. Its 720 pages contain the complete Latin Bible, ancient medical texts, historical chronicles, and even exorcism formulas, all written in a single, unbroken hand. This consistency is the first clue that appends the legend. Modern forensic analysis reveals the handwriting matches throughout, but the work would have taken at least 25 years of daily scribing, not one frantic night. The ink, too, shows no signs of haste, each letter carefully formed with the same iron gall ink used across Europe. Then there's the infamous devil portrait, a haunting depiction of the Prince of Darkness in crimson and blue, his claws outstretched, his torso split between human and beast. Medieval manuscripts often included demonic imagery as cautionary tales, but none so prominently placed or eerily detailed. Some scholars argue the image wasn't meant to glorify evil but to serve as a spiritual warning, a memento diaboli, reminding readers of sin's consequences. Others point to the facing page, which shows the heavenly city, suggesting a deliberate contrast between salvation and damnation. But the real enigma lies in the margins. Scattered throughout the text are tiny, cryptic annotations, etchings of a hand, a sliver of moon, even a disembodied face peeking from the letters. Were these secret messages the scribe's private musings or something more? In one chilling instance, the phrase Hermanus Inclusus appears Latin for Herman the Recluse, a possible reference to the monk who penned it. If true, was Herman confessing to isolation or something darker? The Codex's survival is another twist in its tale. Stolen by Swedish troops during the 30 Years' War, it spent centuries in a royal library before modern technology allowed its secrets to be probed. Spectral imaging uncovered erased passages, including what might have been the scribe's name, scrubbed away by time or deliberate hands. Even its sheer physicality raises questions. Why create something so impractical? Some speculate it was a prestige project meant to showcase a monastery's wealth and devotion. Others wonder if it was a penance, a literal burden carried to atone for sins. Today, the Devil's Bible sits in Stockholm's National Library, its pages digitized for the world to scrutinize. Yet the central question lingers: was this monumental work born of divine inspiration, demonic intervention, or simply human determination stretched to its limits? Perhaps the truth lies in the paradox of the manuscript itself, a testament to faith that dares to stare into the face of the infernal, a bridge between piety and the profane. One thing is certain: in a world where most medieval mysteries fade, the Codex Gigas still commands attention, its pages whispering across 8 centuries to anyone brave enough to listen. High above the rolling hills of Tuscany, inside the crumbling stone walls of the Monte Sepi Chapel, a sword stands embedded in solid rock, just like the legends of King Arthur. But this isn't Camelot. This is the sword of Galgano Guidotti, a 12th century knight who supposedly plunged his blade into stone as proof of his renunciation of violence. Unlike Excalibur, this weapon wasn't pulled from an anvil by a destined king. It was left there by a man who traded his armor for a monk's robe. And here's the twist: scientists have confirmed the sword is real, dating back to Guidotti's lifetime, making it one of the only physical artifacts linked to a sword in the stone myth anywhere in the world. Galgano's story reads like a medieval screenplay. Once a ruthless warrior, he claimed to have a vision of the Archangel Michael who led him to this hilltop. There, rather than strike down enemies, he thrust his sword into the rock as a cross, a symbol of his surrender to faith. The locals were skeptical until they found the blade immovable, as if the stone had swallowed it whole. Within years, the chapel was built around it, and pilgrims flocked to see the miracle. But was it divine intervention or clever medieval marketing? Modern researchers took a closer look. In 2001, a team of archaeologists used ground-penetrating radar to scan the area beneath the sword. What they found sent chills down their spines. Below the chapel floor lies a cavity, possibly a forgotten hermit's cave or even Guidotti's original burial site. Then came the metallurgical analysis. The sword's composition matches 12th century Italian craftsmanship, with traces of weathering consistent with centuries of exposure, but the stone itself is the real puzzle. X-rays revealed the blade isn't just wedged between cracks, it's embedded deep within solid rock, with no visible seams or tool marks suggesting artificial placement. So how did it get there? One theory points to geologic trickery. The stone is actually a type of sedimentary rock that forms in layers. If Guidotti drove his sword into a fissure and natural mineralization processes sealed it over time, the rock could have fossilized the blade in place. Others argue the chapel's location on an ancient volcanic ridge might explain it. Heat and pressure could have fused metal to stone. But skeptics counter that even these processes would take far longer than the few decades between Guidotti's death and the earliest accounts of the sword's fame. Then there's the human element. Guidotti's transformation mirrored the Arthurian legends spreading across Europe at the time. Was his story embellished to inspire faith, or did he deliberately echo the tales of Excalibur to lend his conversion more weight? The chapel's frescoes blur the lines further, depicting Galgano with unmistakably Arthurian imagery, a round table, a spear like the Holy Lance, hinting that medieval worshippers saw him as Italy's answer to Camelot's king. Today, the sword still rests in its stone, protected by a glass case, yet no less enigmatic. Visitors report a strange energy around it, some claiming their hands tingle when they reach toward the hilt. Science has peeled back layers of the mystery, but the core question remains: did a knight's fervent faith really defy the laws of nature, or is this a masterclass in medieval myth-making? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between, a miracle not of divine force, but of the stories we tell to make sense of the extraordinary. One thing's certain: in a world obsessed with pulling swords from stones, this blade was meant to stay put, a silent witness to the power of belief. In the quiet town of Lanciano, Italy, during the 8th century, a humble Basilian monk stood before his congregation to perform the sacrament of the Eucharist, a ritual repeated countless times across Christendom. But this time, something extraordinary happened. As he uttered the words of consecration, the monk's hands trembled. The bread in his grip no longer resembled simple wafer. It had transformed, taking on the color and texture of flesh. The wine in the chalice thickened into globules dark as coagulated blood. The stunned worshippers crowded closer, their whispers turning to gasps. What should have been symbolic had become startlingly, undeniably real. The miracle was immediately enshrined, the transformed Eucharist preserved in a reliquary where it remains to this day 12 centuries later. But here's where the story shifts from medieval legend to modern fascination. In 1971, a team of scientists led by Dr. Edoardo Linoli, a professor of anatomy and pathology, obtained permission to examine the relics. What they discovered defied easy explanation. The flesh was confirmed to be striated muscle tissue from a human heart, specifically the myocardium, the thickest layer of the heart wall. Even more astonishing, the blood was type AB, consistent with the Shroud of Turin's purported bloodstains and a common type among Middle Eastern populations. The tissue showed no signs of artificial preservation, yet it had resisted decay for over 1,000 years, a phenomenon science still struggles to account for. Skeptics have offered theories, some suggesting the flesh might be a later substitution, perhaps a medieval hoax using mummified tissue. Yet the precision of the findings complicates this idea. The myocardial tissue displayed clear signs of trauma, including inflammation consistent with severe stress, as if the heart had suffered immense agony. For believers, this echoes the crucifixion's physical toll. Even the blood separation into 5 globules, now hardened like polished stones, mirrors ancient Eucharistic customs where bread was broken into 5 pieces. But the mystery deepens with modern technology. In 2018, additional tests using advanced microscopy revealed the tissue lacked traces of salt or preservatives, ruling out typical mummification methods. The heart tissue also contained intact proteins and minerals in ratios found only in living flesh, not desiccated samples. How could such biological material remain so pristine without deliberate intervention? Forensic experts admit it's unprecedented outside of controlled lab conditions. So what are we to make of Lanciano? For some, it's divine intervention, a tangible sign of sacred mysteries beyond human understanding. For others, it's a historical oddity, a medieval artifact that somehow survived with inexplicable integrity. Perhaps the most compelling detail is the monk's own reaction. Records claim he initially doubted his faith, terrified by what he'd witnessed. Only after seeing the awe of his flock did he accept it as grace, not punishment. Whether miracle or marvel, the flesh and blood of Lanciano endure, silent yet potent, challenging us to wrestle with the boundaries between faith and fact. In a world hungry for proof, this tiny Italian town holds a relic that refuses to be dismissed, a heart, quite literally, frozen in time. The first cough echoed through the Crimean port of Kaffa in 1346, a sound so ordinary no one thought to fear it. But within weeks, the streets of this bustling Genoese trading hub were littered with bodies, their skin mottled with dark, oozing swellings. The terrified survivors fled by ship, carrying their invisible cargo west, unwittingly unleashing the deadliest pandemic in human history. But where did it begin? For centuries, historians pointed to Kaffa as the plague's gateway to Europe, citing accounts of Mongol forces catapulting infected corpses over the city walls. Yet new discoveries suggest the truth is far more complex, buried in the DNA of victims who never lived to tell their tale. Genetic detectives have turned to plague pits, mass graves scattered across Europe, to track the killer's footsteps. In 2011, scientists analyzing skeletal remains from London's East Smithfield Cemetery made a startling breakthrough. The strain of Yersinia pestis extracted from those 14th-century teeth didn't match later outbreaks, hinting at multiple introductions of the bacterium. Then came the bombshell. In 2020, researchers sequencing DNA from graves in Kyrgyzstan's Tian Shan Mountains found traces of the plague dating back to 1338, 8 years before Kaffa's siege. The strain was the direct ancestor of all known Black Death variants, placing patient zero somewhere along the Silk Road's tangled web of trade routes. But why did this particular outbreak spiral into catastrophe? Climate holds a clue. Tree ring data reveals the 14th century's Great Famine period, decades of erratic weather that left populations malnourished and vulnerable. Meanwhile, Mongol expansion had reshaped Eurasia's ecosystems, pushing disease-carrying rodents into contact with human settlements. When the plague reached Europe's crowded, unsanitary cities, it found the perfect storm. A continent weakened by hunger, connected by commerce, and utterly unprepared for microscopic invasion. The myth of Kaffa's biological warfare persists, but modern epidemiology paints a subtler picture. While the siege may have accelerated the plague's spread, the pathogen was already loose, hitching rides on grain shipments and flea-infested rats long before the first corpse sailed over a wall. Some scholars now argue the real ground zero lay further east, perhaps near Lake Issyk-Kul, where 14th century tombstones describe a pestilence years earlier. Others trace it to China's Yunnan province, where the bacterium may have simmered in rodent populations for centuries before trade routes gave it an escape route. What makes the Black Death's origins so haunting isn't just the scale of its devastation, it's the eerie parallels to our own time. A pathogen crossing continents along routes of commerce, officials downplaying the threat until it was too late, societies fracturing under the strain. The plague's ghost lingers not just in our DNA. 1 in 5 Europeans today carry genetic adaptations from survivors, but in the uncomfortable truth that globalization's blessings have always walked hand in hand with its curses. As we piece together the past with tools our medieval ancestors couldn't fathom, one question remains. If we'd known then what we know now, could 25 million lives have been saved? The answer, like the plague's first victim, may be lost to time. In the chaotic final hours of May 29, 1453, as Ottoman soldiers poured through the shattered gates of Constantinople, Emperor Constantine XI made a fateful decision. Clad in purple robes and the sacred regalia of Byzantium, he tore the pearl-encrusted crown from his head and hurled it into the swirling mass of his fleeing courtiers. "Save this," he allegedly commanded, "so the world may remember us." Then, sword in hand, he charged into the fray, vanishing into legend as the last Roman emperor. His body was never identified, but the crown, the very symbol of a millennium-old empire, disappeared that day into the smoke of history. Or did it? For centuries, the fate of Byzantium's final crown tantalized treasure hunters and historians alike. Ottoman records mention no such plunder, suggesting it escaped the systematic looting that followed the city's fall. Some whispered it was smuggled to Rome, hidden in the vaults of a sympathetic cardinal. Others claimed it was melted down in a Venetian backstreet, its gems sold to fund refugee ships. But in 2017, an auction catalogue from an obscure Swiss collector sent shockwaves through academic circles. Listed between an illuminated Quran and a set of Mogul daggers was an item simply described as late medieval imperial diadem, provenance Constantinople. The grainy photograph showed a gold circlet studded with uneven pearls, eerily matching descriptions of Constantine's lost crown. Experts scrambled to investigate. The pearls' arrangement, according to Byzantine scholars, mirrored the asymmetrical design favored by late Palaiologos emperors, a deliberate imperfection symbolizing humanity's distance from divine perfection. More tellingly, spectrographic analysis revealed gold alloys consistent with 14th century Anatolian mines, precisely where Byzantium sourced its metals after losing control of Balkan goldfields. But the clincher lay in the circlet's interior, microscopic traces of a unique red wax, residue from the ceremonial seals used to affirm imperial decrees. Yet controversy erupted when the artifact vanished again. Withdrawn from sale amid legal battles over its ownership, the collector insisted it had been in his family for generations, acquired from a Crimean merchant in the 1700s. Critics called it an elaborate fake, pointing to inconsistencies in the pearl drill holes, too precise for medieval tools. Then came an unexpected twist. Satellite imagery revealed that the Swiss collector's villa stood atop the ruins of a Genoese trading post, a known hub for Byzantine refugees. Was this crown a genuine relic, spirited away piece by piece over centuries, or an exquisite fabrication playing on historians' deepest desires? The answer may lie in an overlooked detail. In 2022, a Greek researcher cross-referencing monastic archives found a cryptic entry dated 1454. A nun's diary described a holy burden delivered by a wounded soldier to the island of Patmos, a place famed for safeguarding sacred treasures during crises. The item was sealed in a lead casket and entrusted to the monastery's abbot, who vowed it would remain hidden until the empire rises again. No further mention appears, but Patmos happens to be just a day's sail from the Genoese outpost where the Swiss collector's ancestors lived. Today, the crown's whereabouts remain as mysterious as Constantine's final moments. If genuine, it represents more than a lost artifact. It's the last physical thread to an empire that bridged antiquity and the Renaissance. Perhaps it's fitting that Byzantium's ultimate symbol eludes us still, a ghostly echo of its resilience. After all, this was a civilization that refused to fade quietly, seeding the modern world with its art, laws, and dreams. Whether the crown resurfaces or not, its legend endures, a whisper across time that some treasures aren't merely lost, they're waiting. The night air over Belgrade hung thick with smoke and the metallic tang of blood as Ottoman forces pressed their attack in July 1456. The Christian defenders, outnumbered and exhausted, braced for the final assault when suddenly the sky itself seemed to split open. Witnesses would later swear they saw an army of spectral knights descending from the clouds, their ghostly banners fluttering in a wind that didn't stir the grass below. The apparitions wore armor from centuries past, their faces obscured by mist as they charged the Ottoman lines with silent fury. Panic tore through the invading forces. Men dropped their weapons, some fleeing in terror, others falling to their knees as if struck by invisible blades. By dawn, the Ottomans had retreated in disarray, leaving behind a victory so improbable it would be remembered as the miracle of Belgrade. But what really happened that night? Historical accounts from both sides corroborate the event. The Ottoman chronicler Tursun Beg recorded phantoms in the forms of ancient warriors descending from the hills, while Hungarian defenders spoke of St. George leading a heavenly host. Even Pope Calixtus III declared it a divine intervention, ordering church bells to ring at noon in perpetual commemoration, a tradition still observed in some Catholic communities today. Yet modern scholars peel back the layers of legend to uncover more earthly explanations. One compelling theory points to mass hallucination. The defenders, sleep-deprived and under extreme stress, might have experienced shared delusions fueled by desperation. History is littered with similar cases, from crusaders seeing crosses in the sky to World War I soldiers reporting angelic visions during trench warfare. But another possibility lies in the very air they breathed. That summer, the Danube's marshes were particularly fetid, releasing dense clouds of methane and other gases that could have interacted with torchlight to create shimmering mirages. The ghost army might have been a rare form of fata morgana, an atmospheric phenomenon where light bends to project distant objects or landscapes onto the horizon. If a contingent of reinforcements was marching under the cover of darkness, their distorted images could have appeared to float above the battlefield like an ethereal host. There's even evidence of unusual solar activity that year, with records from as far as China noting vivid auroras. Could a geomagnetic storm have amplified these effects, turning natural illusions into something truly uncanny? Then there's the overlooked factor of sound. The siege occurred near the ruins of the ancient Roman city of Singidunum, where underground tunnels and hollow ruins might have amplified the clatter of real cavalry into an echoing, otherworldly din. An unexpected shift in wind direction could have carried these sounds ahead of the actual troops, creating the illusion of an advancing phantom force. Yet the most haunting detail comes from an anonymous Serbian soldier's diary, discovered in a monastery archive in 1982. He describes not just seeing the spectral army but hearing them sing a slow, mournful chant in a language he didn't recognize. Linguists later identified the phrase he transcribed as bearing striking resemblance to Gothic, a language extinct in the Balkans for nearly 1,000 years. Was this a collective hallucination tapping into racial memory, or something stranger still? Today, the ghost army of Belgrade remains a collision of faith, science, and the untapped quirks of human perception. Whether divine intervention, atmospheric trickery, or the sheer power of belief, the event changed history, halting the Ottoman advance into Europe for decades. Perhaps the truth doesn't lie in proving or debunking the miracle, but in recognizing how easily the veil between the possible and the impossible can tear in moments of crisis. After all, in the smoke and chaos of that July night, one thing is certain: those who saw the ghosts believed, and belief can be the most powerful weapon of all. Paris in the late 14th century was a city of smoke and secrets, where whispers of forbidden knowledge drifted through the twisting alleyways behind Notre Dame. Among the shadows moved Nicholas Flamel, a humble scribe whose name would become legend not for his bookkeeping but for a claim that defied nature itself. According to lore, Flamel had unlocked the Philosopher's Stone, the alchemist's holy grail, transforming lead into gold and brewing the elixir of immortality. His sudden wealth funding hospitals, churches, and cryptic symbols carved into buildings only fueled the rumors. But was Flamel truly a master of the mystical arts, or just a clever man who knew how to spin straw into stories? Centuries later, scientists finally got their hands on artifacts tied to Flamel's legacy. In 2008, a team at the University of Paris analyzed a small, tarnished ingot kept in the archives of the Bibliothèque Nationale, said to be one of Flamel's own creations. The results were baffling. While the surface was indeed gold, the core contained traces of lead and mercury, precisely the ingredients alchemical texts described for transmutation. Even stranger, isotopic ratios in the gold didn't match any known European mines of Flamel's era. Had someone stumbled upon an ancient technique lost to time, or was this evidence of something more extraordinary? Flamel wasn't alone in his pursuits. Across medieval Europe, alchemists like Basil Valentine and George Ripley penned cryptic manuscripts filled with allegorical dragons, dying kings, and celestial marriages veiled instructions for their craft. Modern chemistry has debunked much of their work, but not all of it. When researchers recreated recipes from Valentine's 12 keys, they discovered his purification by starlight method produced gold chloride, a compound unknown until the 18th century. How did he achieve this without modern tools? Some argue these weren't literal recipes but spiritual metaphors, while others suspect alchemists guarded their true methods in code to avoid persecution. Then there's the case of Edward Kelly, the infamous Elizabethan alchemist who claimed to converse with angels through a stolen crystal ball. Emperor Rudolph II kept him under house arrest for years, demanding demonstrations of gold making. Kelly's surviving sample, tested in 1994, revealed an alloy of gold and copper, a primitive form of tumbaga used by pre-Columbian cultures but virtually unknown in Europe. Did Kelly uncover lost New World techniques, or was he simply a fraud who got lucky? The alloy's unusual purity suggests something beyond mere luck. Perhaps the most compelling evidence lies not in the metals themselves, but in the alchemist's own words. Flamel's last will, discovered in 2019, contained a bizarre passage. The work is done in the silence of the earth where the sun does not shine. Geologists now speculate this could reference naturally occurring nuclear reactions in deep ore veins, a phenomenon called geological alchemy, where radioactive decay transforms elements over millennia. Could these medieval seekers have stumbled upon natural processes science is only now beginning to understand? Today, the line between alchemy and chemistry blurs in unexpected ways. Particle accelerators routinely transmute elements, and nanotech experiments have achieved molecular scale philosopher's stones. Yet the mystery of Flamel's gold endures, a glittering enigma at the crossroads of science and legend. Whether trickery, genius, or something beyond our reckoning, these medieval experimenters left behind clues that still tease the boundaries of possibility. After all, in a world where base metals can become precious with enough energy and time, who's to say the alchemists were entirely wrong just centuries ahead of their time? The courtroom in 16th century Poligny, France, smelled of sweat and melted candle wax as the accused man, Pierre Bergot, stood trembling before the judge. His crime, not theft, not murder, but transforming into a wolf under the full moon and hunting children through the forests. Under torture, Bergot confessed in horrifying detail: a pact with the devil, an ointment that made his skin sprout fur, and the taste of human flesh lingering in his mouth upon waking. His testimony sent shockwaves through Europe, igniting a wave of werewolf trials that would claim hundreds of lives. But what drove entire communities to believe their neighbors could shapeshift into beasts, and why did so many accused willingly confess to the impossible? These weren't isolated cases. From Germany's Peter Stump, the so-called werewolf of Bedburg, to Lithuania's Thies of Kaltenbrunn, medieval courts documented dozens of werewolf prosecutions with eerie consistency. The confessions followed a pattern: encounters with shadowy figures offering supernatural power, animalistic urges rising during certain lunar phases, and hazy memories of running on all fours. Modern psychiatry recognizes elements of clinical lycanthropy, a rare delusion where sufferers believe they transform into animals. But the scale of these trials suggests something deeper at work, a perfect storm of famine, disease, and religious panic that turned folklore into fatal accusation. The wolf held unique symbolic weight in medieval Europe. Unlike dragons or griffins, wolves were real threats, prowling the edges of villages during harsh winters. Church sermons often cast them as agents of the devil, with psalms warning, "Deliver my soul from the sword, my darling from the power of the dog." When livestock disappeared or children went missing, the leap to supernatural explanations was tragically easy. Forensic analysis of trial records reveals most accusations clustered in regions recently devastated by war or crop failure, where desperate populations sought scapegoats for their suffering. But the most chilling aspect: many werewolves seemed genuinely convinced of their guilt. Bergot described his transformations with visceral sensory details: the cracking of bones, the coppery taste of blood. Contemporary scholars now suspect some may have ingested ergot-infected rye or hallucinogenic plants like belladonna, triggering psychotic episodes where fantasy and reality blurred. Others might have suffered from porphyria, a rare genetic disorder causing photosensitivity, gum recession, and madness, symptoms easily misread as lycanthropy. The trials also exposed medieval Europe's fascination with the boundary between human and beast. Werewolf confessions often mirrored witch trial tropes: pacts with the devil, nocturnal gatherings, but with a crucial difference: where witches were outsiders, werewolves were frequently ordinary villagers, suggesting deeper fears about the beast within all humanity. Some modern anthropologists argue these trials functioned as psychological pressure valves, allowing communities to purge violent impulses by projecting them onto a few monstrous individuals. Perhaps the most tragic case comes from Switzerland in 1580, when an 8-year-old boy confessed to becoming a wolf cub after playing in the woods. The court, taking his childish fantasy as evidence, sentenced him to life in a monastery. His story, and hundreds like it, reveal less about supernatural creatures than about the very human need to make sense of chaos through narrative, no matter how terrifying. In the end, the real monsters weren't the accused, but the shadows cast by collective fear, shadows that linger even today in our werewolf myths and monster stories. Down in the sweltering heat of Barbados, beneath the stone floor of the Christ Church Parish Cemetery, the Chase family vault held more than just the dead. It harbored a riddle that defied logic. When workers pried open the heavy marble slab in 1818 to add another coffin, they stumbled upon a scene of chaos. The lead coffins, each weighing hundreds of pounds, had been flung from their places. Some lay upside down, others wedged against the walls as if tossed by an unseen hand. This wasn't the first time. Over a dozen years, the vault was opened 4 times, and each occasion revealed the same eerie disarray despite the door being sealed with the governor's own signet ring between disturbances. What could move coffins without leaving a trace? The theories are as varied as they are unsettling. Some pointed to natural gas buildup, suggesting pockets of methane might have erupted with enough force to shift the heavy caskets. But skeptics counter that the vault's construction, porous coral stone walls and gaps between slabs, would have allowed gas to dissipate long before reaching explosive pressure. Even if gas were the culprit, why did it only affect the coffins and not the vault's lighter wooden fragments? Others proposed flooding, yet locals swore the chamber stayed bone dry even during tropical storms. Then there are the darker explanations. Barbados' history is steeped in colonial unrest, and the Chase family were plantation owners with reputations for cruelty. Could the disturbances have been the work of clandestine vandals, perhaps descendants of the enslaved seeking retribution? The logistics strain belief. How would intruders bypass the heavy door undetected, rearrange the coffins without leaving marks, then reseal the vault perfectly every time? Even more chilling are the whispers of supernatural vengeance. The final coffin placed in the vault belonged to young Dorcas Chase, who'd reportedly starved herself to escape her father's tyranny. Did her restless spirit trigger the phenomena? The mystery took an even stranger turn when, in 1820, the decision was made to relocate the coffins. From that day forward, the vault remained undisturbed. Was the answer tied to the structure itself, some peculiarity in the limestone's composition that caused subtle shifts over time? Modern engineers speculate about underground water currents or seismic vibrations, though Barbados sits far from active fault lines. Or perhaps the solution is simpler: human error. Contemporary accounts note the vault's floor was layered with fine sand to cushion the coffins. If the sand had been unevenly distributed, the weight of the lead caskets might have caused them to slowly slide or topple when the door was opened, creating the illusion of paranormal activity. Yet none of these theories fully explain the eyewitness accounts of coffins wedged vertically or jammed into corners. The governor's own records describe how one coffin appeared to have been hurled with such violence that it left an indentation in the stone. With no definitive answer, the moving coffins of Barbados remain an enigma, a puzzle where geology, history, and folklore collide. Whether the product of natural forces, human hands, or something beyond our understanding, the Chase Vault stands as a testament to the fact that some mysteries refuse to stay buried. Among the countless relics venerated across medieval Europe, none stirred more fascination or awkward questions than the holy prepuce, the purported foreskin of Jesus Christ. At least a dozen churches from Antwerp to Santiago proudly displayed their own versions of this sacred skin, each insisting theirs was the one true holy remnant of the circumcision. The very idea might seem shocking today, but in an era where relics equaled divine power, even the most intimate fragments of Christ's humanity became objects of fervent devotion. The relic's journey begins in the early medieval period, when pious legends suggested Mary herself preserved the foreskin as a testament to her son's earthly incarnation. By the 12th century, Charlemagne was said to have received it from an angel, later gifting it to the papal enclave in Rome. But the real explosion came during the Crusades, when competing churches across Europe suddenly discovered their own holy prepuces. Chartres Cathedral claimed theirs miraculously appeared during Mass, glowing with celestial light. the Abbey of Coulombs insisted theirs bled annually on Good Friday, a phenomenon witnessed by hundreds. Most audacious of all was the version enshrined in Calcutta, Italy, where villagers swore their relic granted miracles for centuries until it was stolen in 1983 by thieves some believe were rival relic hunters. Why such fervor over an object modern minds might find distasteful? Medieval theology held that Christ's physical body ascended wholly to heaven except for what was shed during his lifetime: hair, nails, blood, and yes, the foreskin removed during his Jewish circumcision. These left-behind fragments became tangible proof of God's human experience. The more relics a church possessed, the greater its spiritual authority and pilgrimage revenue. The holy prepuce, as the only bodily relic directly tied to Christ's infancy, held particular power, but the logistics strained credulity. How could so many churches possess the same fragment? Some claimed their prepuce multiplied miraculously, like the loaves and fishes. Others argued that each was a different layer, as if the foreskin had been preserved like an onion. The church, increasingly embarrassed by the proliferation, finally banned veneration of the relic in 1900, though whispers persist that at least 3 hidden specimens remain in private collections. From divine relic to theological hot potato, the Holy Prepuce's journey reveals just how far medieval faith would go to hold the divine in hand, no matter how unexpected the form. The cobbled streets of Norwich were slick with rain that spring of 1144, when young William's body was discovered at the edge of a wooded stream. The 12-year-old apprentice had last been seen following a stranger into the maze of alleyways near the tannery, his throat slit, his limbs oddly arranged as if posed. What followed wasn't just a murder investigation, but the birth of one of history's most pernicious myths: the blood libel, the accusation that Jewish communities murdered Christian children for ritual purposes. Medieval chroniclers like Thomas of Monmouth wove a lurid tale. William, they claimed, was lured into a Jewish household where his captors reenacted the crucifixion, tying him to a cross, piercing his side, and draining his blood into ceremonial cups. Never mind that Jewish law strictly prohibits blood consumption, or that there wasn't a shred of physical evidence linking Norwich's Jewish community to the crime. The story spread like wildfire, fueled by Easter season sermons painting Jews as Christ killers. Within decades, similar accusations cropped up across Europe, from Blois to Lincoln, each more fantastical than the last. Modern historians peel back these layers of prejudice to reveal a grimmer truth. Norwich in the 12th century was a tinderbox of resentment. Jewish moneylenders, often the only source of loans in an era when Christians couldn't charge interest, were targets of envy. When local nobles owed crushing debts, blaming outsiders for a child's murder became a convenient way to redirect rage. Forensic analysis of the original accounts reveals another clue. William's wounds didn't match ritual violence but bore the hallmarks of a botched kidnapping or even a drunken brawl gone wrong. Archaeology offers even more startling insights. In 2013, researchers examining Norwich's medieval Jewish quarter uncovered a hidden tunnel beneath a suspected ritual bath. While some sensationalists claimed this proved clandestine activities, the structure was actually an escape route built after the blood libel accusations began, as families dug desperately to flee mob violence. The tunnel's scorch marks tell their own story. It was eventually set ablaze by rioters, yet the most haunting revelation comes from William's own legacy. Venerated as a martyr, his shrine became a pilgrimage site, earning the cathedral substantial revenue. Financial records show donations spiked whenever anti-Jewish pogroms flared nearby, suggesting the church had little incentive to debunk the myth. Even today, a plaque in Norwich Cathedral ambiguously refers to William's tragic death, leaving the libel's venom half-acknowledged but uncondemned. So why does this medieval cold case still matter? Because it wasn't an anomaly, it was a blueprint. The same tropes resurfaced during the Black Death, when Jews were blamed for poisoning wells, and later in Nazi propaganda. The bloody boy of Norwich reminds us how easily fear twists facts into weapons and how myths once unleashed can outlive empires. 5 centuries later, we're left to wonder how many lives might have been spared if just one voice had shouted down the lie. Sailors whispered about it for centuries, a mist-shrouded island off Ireland's coast that appeared only once every 7 years, its streets paved in gold, its inhabitants blessed with eternal youth. Cartographers dutifully inked it onto their maps as High Brassel, a circular landmass split by a winding river, often drawn with such precision you'd swear someone had actually anchored there. But no matter how many expeditions set sail to find it, the island remained stubbornly out of reach, vanishing like a mirage whenever ships drew near. High Brassel wasn't alone. Medieval and Renaissance maps are littered with phantom islands: Friesland, St. Brendan's Isle, the Isle of Demons, places that never existed yet persisted on parchment for hundreds of years. How did these cartographic ghosts captivate explorers so completely? And why did even the most learned geographers defend their existence long after evidence proved otherwise? The answer begins with the limitations of medieval navigation. Unlike today's satellite-precise charts, early maps were patchworks of sailor lore, classical texts like Ptolemy's geography, and pure conjecture. A captain might describe spotting land through fog, only for later cartographers to enshrine that unverified claim as fact. High Brassel's first known appearance dates to a 1351 Catalan atlas, likely inspired by Irish myths of a paradise beyond the waves. Once inscribed on vellum, such places took on a life of their own, copied unquestioningly from map to map like a centuries-long game of telephone. The island's name itself, sometimes spelled Brassel or Bressel, may derive from the Celtic word briers, meaning noble or fortunate, hinting at its role as a symbolic Eden rather than a physical locale. But not all phantom islands sprang from legend. Some were deliberate deceptions. Take Friesland, a sprawling landmass that appeared near Iceland on 16th-century maps. Venetian explorer Niccolò Zeno claimed his ancestors had discovered it in the late 1400s, but historians now suspect the Zeno family fabricated the island to inflate their own legacy. Their discovery was so convincing that famed cartographer Gerardus Mercator included it in his 1569 world map, and would-be colonists nearly sailed into disaster searching for it. Other phantom islands likely stemmed from misidentified icebergs, optical illusions caused by temperature inversions, or even volcanic eruptions that temporarily formed new land before sinking beneath the waves. The most haunting cases involve islands that almost existed. Buss Island, supposedly spotted by sailors in the North Atlantic in 1578, appeared on maps for 200 years before being erased. Modern oceanography reveals shallow shoals in its reported location, remnants of a submerged landmass that may have been visible during periods of lower sea levels. Similarly, the Isle of Demons off Canada's coast, where 16th-century French noblewoman Marguerite de la Roque was marooned as punishment for an illicit affair, was later proven to be a mischarted section of Newfoundland. Marguerite's harrowing account of surviving attacks by spectral creatures only cemented its sinister reputation, showing how human imagination could transform a cartographic error into a nightmare. Why did these illusions hold such power? Partly because maps served dual purposes. They were both navigational tools and statements of political ambition. Claiming an island, even an imaginary one, could justify colonial expansion or secure royal patronage. Spain and Portugal's 15th-century rivalry over the Azores and Madeira led to exaggerated or invented landmasses being added to maps as bargaining chips in territorial disputes. The Church also played a role. Places like St. Brendan's Isle, named after the 6th-century voyaging monk, reinforced Christian cosmology by suggesting divine mysteries still awaited discovery. The death knell for phantom islands came with the Age of Enlightenment, as systematic surveys and chronometers made navigation precise. yet traces lingered. High Brassel wasn't fully scrubbed from charts until the 1800s, and even today, remote sensing occasionally reveals oddities that tempt us with the old mysteries. In 2012, scientists mapping the seafloor of Australia found a landmass the size of Iceland on satellite data, only to realize it was a software glitch. Some legends die hard. From mirages to myths, these phantom islands remind us that every map is as much a record of human longing as it is of the Earth's true shape, a testament to the uncharted territories still lurking in our collective imagination. In the dim candlelight of his Oxford workshop, the Franciscan friar Roger Bacon bent over a grotesque creation, a hollow bronze head, its lips slightly parted as if frozen mid-whisper. According to 13th century chroniclers, this wasn't mere sculpture but something far more unsettling, an artificial oracle designed to unveil the secrets of the universe. The legend claims Bacon and his apprentice, a young German friar named Bungay, labored for 7 years to imbue the metal with speech, consulting ancient Arabic texts on automata and the occult sciences. Then, one stormy night in 1267, the head finally stirred. Its first words, "Time is," then, hours later, "Time was," and finally, as dawn approached, a shattering pronouncement, "Time is past," before the head exploded in a burst of fire, leaving only melted fragments and a room reeking of sulfur. This story might sound like pure medieval fantasy, but Bacon was no ordinary friar. A polymath centuries ahead of his time, he dabbled in optics, astronomy, and even early cryptography, earning the nickname Dr. Mirabilis for his seemingly magical insight. His writings reference self-moving instruments and talking heads, sparking speculation that he'd rediscovered lost Greek or Arab designs for mechanical oracles. Historians note that Hellenistic engineers like Hero of Alexandria had built steam-powered automatons, while Islamic scholars in Baghdad's House of Wisdom crafted water-driven clocks with moving figures. Could Bacon have adapted these technologies, creating Europe's first known attempt at an artificial intelligence? The deeper irony lies in the head's cryptic messages, phrases that eerily foreshadow modern AI struggles with temporal reasoning. Medieval scholars interpreted the outburst as divine judgment on human hubris, a warning against probing too deeply into nature's secrets. Yet from a 21st century perspective, the sequence reads like a primitive algorithm glitching, a machine grappling with the concept of time but unable to contextualize it. This duality, device or demon, haunts the story. When King Edward I reportedly investigated the workshop, he found charred notebooks filled with diagrams of interlacing gears and symbols matching those in Bacon's coded manuscripts on The Art of Artificial Generation. Parallels emerge across Europe. In the same century, Albertus Magnus allegedly constructed a brass man that answered questions until Thomas Aquinas, fearing its demonic origins, smashed it to pieces. These tales reflect medieval Europe's uneasy dance between innovation and orthodoxy, a world where mechanical wonders blurred into heresy. Bacon himself was imprisoned for suspected novelties, his writings on experimental science deemed dangerously radical. The speaking head became a cautionary symbol. Knowledge without moral boundaries led to ruin. Modern engineers offer a tantalizing alternative theory. Bronze heads could act as acoustic resonators, an ancient version of today's voice assistants. In 1992, a team at MIT reconstructed a possible design using period-appropriate materials, a hollow head with internal chambers to amplify sound, paired with a hidden tube for a confederate to ventriloquize responses. The dramatic explosion, perhaps a built-in failsafe, a chemical charge to destroy the device if tampered with, ensuring its secrets died with its creator. Yet the mystery endures. No physical remnant of Bacon's head survives, and his own writings reference it only obliquely. Was it a thought experiment, a misunderstood workshop accident, or something stranger? 5 centuries later, when Mary Shelley penned Frankenstein, she channeled this very medieval anxiety that creation might outstrip creator. Today, as chatbots blur the line between programmed response and apparent understanding, Bacon's bronze oracle feels less like superstition and more like a prophecy. Perhaps the real lesson isn't in the head's destruction, but in its haunting final words, a reminder that time indeed runs out for all who dare to play God. In the flickering darkness of a medieval burglary, a thief wouldn't reach for lockpicks or crowbars instead. He'd clutch something far more sinister, the withered, mummified hand of a hanged man, its fingers twisted into crude candles. This was the Hand of Glory, a macabre talisman believed to render its bearer invisible, silence creaking floorboards, and most importantly, force any locked door to swing open like it recognized its master. Recipes for its creation varied, but the most common instructions were chillingly precise. Sever the right hand of a corpse left swinging on the gallows at midnight, wrap it in burial shroud linen, pickle it for weeks in a jar of salt and peppercorns, then mold candles from the fat of the same hanged man, wicks braided from his hair. When lit, these grisly tapers supposedly cast a light only the thief could see, plunging the household into an unnatural slumber. Museums across Europe still hold surviving specimens, each with its own eerie provenance. The Whitby Museum in Yorkshire displays one tucked inside an antique box, its fingers blackened with centuries-old candle wax. According to local law, it was seized from a thief in the 1700s after a botched robbery. The would-be criminal found frozen in place, overcome by terror when his own hand of glory allegedly turned against him. Over in Scotland, the Museum of Magic and Witchcraft houses another, this one missing 2 fingers, said to have been broken off during a confrontation with a priest who interrupted its use. Modern forensic analysis of these relics reveals unsettling details. Some show signs of actual human tissue preservation, while others are clever fakes crafted from animal bones, suggesting a brisk black market trade in counterfeit hands to meet superstitious demand. The origins of this belief stretch back to ancient Rome, where the dead man's hand was thought to hold divinatory power, but medieval Europe took the concept to new extremes. French grimoires like Le Petit Albert included elaborate instructions for activating the hand, warning that failure to follow each step could result in the user's own death. Some variants required the thief to recite a blasphemous prayer while holding the hand toward the moon, while others insisted the candles only worked if the hanged man had been a murderer himself, his lingering malice fueling the magic. Why did this particular superstition grip the medieval imagination so fiercely? Psychologists point to the era's fraught relationship with execution sites, places where justice and the occult blurred. Gallows were often built at crossroads, liminal spaces already associated with supernatural activity in folklore. The body of a hanged man, suspended between heaven and earth, was thought to absorb otherworldly energy. Combine that with the very real terror of nighttime burglary in an age before streetlights, and the Hand of Glory becomes a twisted kind of insurance policy, a way for the desperate to assert control over a world full of unseen dangers. Yet the darkest twist lies in the hands that survived not as thieves' tools, but as artifacts of legal proceedings. Court records from Bavaria in 1623 describe a burglar caught with one still clutched in his grip. Authorities preserved it as evidence, later displaying it in the town square as a warning. In a grim irony, these objects meant to defy the law became tools of the law. Their very existence used to cement the guilt of those who wielded them. Today, they sit behind glass, their power reduced to curiosity, but the questions they raise linger. Were they ever successful? Historical accounts are frustratingly vague, though one Welsh tale claims an entire village slept through a barn burning down, only to wake and find a Hand of Glory smoldering in the ashes. Perhaps the true horror isn't in the hands themselves, but in what they reveal about the lengths people will go to feel safe or to take what isn't theirs. In an age of science, we've traded hanged men's hands for hacking software and lockpicks, but the underlying fear remains the same, that someone, somewhere, might have a key to every door. The hands of glory whisper that some locks were never meant to be physical but psychological, and those are far harder to pick. The cloistered walls of Wotton Priory should have been a sanctuary, a place where the young nun known only as the Nun of Wotton could devote her life to quiet prayer. But in the mid-12th century, her story took a turn so scandalous it was recorded in horrified detail by the chronicler Aelred of Revaux, a tale of forbidden desire, brutal punishment, and the chilling double standards of medieval religious life. It began with whispers. The nun, placed in the Yorkshire convent as a child oblate, was found to be pregnant. The father, a lay brother from a nearby monastery, their illicit meetings hidden behind the pious routines of monastic life. When the pregnancy could no longer be concealed, the priory's response was swift and savage. The man was dragged before the nuns, beaten and castrated, his genitals reportedly thrown in the nun's face as she was forced to watch. Then came her turn, bound in chains, flogged until her back ran red, and locked in a cell with only the moldering bread and stagnant water that symbolized her sin. What makes this case so revealing isn't just its violence, it's the way medieval society weaponized gender. The lay brother's punishment, while gruesome, was a single act of retribution. The nun, by contrast, endured prolonged torment designed to cleanse her. Aelred's account drips with moralizing, framing her suffering as divine justice for corrupting a holy man. Never mind that as a child oblate, she'd had no say in taking vows. Her body, once dedicated to God, was treated as communal property, its violation an offense against the entire church. The Nun of Wotton's fate reflects a broader medieval obsession with female chastity. Monastic rules for women were often stricter than those for men, with punishments disproportionately harsh. While monks who broke their vows might face penance or temporary confinement, nuns risked permanent imprisonment or worse. Some convents even employed inquisitions of the body, where older nuns inspected younger sisters for signs of sexual activity, a practice that turned spirituality into surveillance. Yet buried in this grim narrative is an unexpected twist. Aelred claims the nun's pregnancy miraculously disappeared after her punishment, the unborn child vanishing as if absorbed by divine intervention. Modern scholars read this as either a cover for miscarriage under torture or a later fabrication to salvage the priory's reputation. Either way, the story exposes medieval tensions between the ideal of purity and the messy reality of human nature. Wotton wasn't an outlier. Similar cases pepper monastic records, from the Nun of Marigny burned alive for infanticide to the French convent where a choir mistress was walled into a cell for loving another sister. Each echoes the same theme: female desire, when it dared exist outside church-sanctioned boundaries, had to be erased, sometimes literally. But here's the haunting question: how many stories like Wotton's were never recorded? For every nun whose punishment made it into chronicles, how many suffered in silence, their voices lost behind cloister walls? The Nun of Wotton's ordeal survives only because Aelred deemed it a cautionary tale. In that sense, her legacy is twofold: a relic of medieval cruelty and a reminder that history's darkest corners often hide its most revealing truths. The night sky over Europe in June 1456 wasn't just a canvas of stars, it was an omen. Halley's comet streaked across the heavens, its tail stretching like a celestial sword pointed directly at Christendom. To medieval eyes, this wasn't astronomy, it was divine wrath made visible. Church bells clanged in panic, farmers abandoned their fields, convinced the fiery visitor heralded the end of days. In Rome, Pope Calixtus III ordered special prayers and excommunicated the comet itself, declaring it an instrument of the devil. Meanwhile, physicians in Vienna reported patients dying of sheer terror, their bodies found rigid in bed, eyes frozen wide at the sight outside their windows. Contemporary chronicles reveal how quickly superstition outpaced reason. The Nuremberg Chronicle, one of the most detailed records of the era, describes the comet as a dragon with 3 heads, interpreting its tripartite tail as a sign of the unholy trinity. In France, peasants claimed to hear shrieks emanating from the comet's glow, voices of damned souls dragged heavenward. Apocalyptic pamphlets circulated with woodcut illustrations showing the comet striking the earth like a lance, igniting cities and boiling seas. Even educated minds weren't immune. German astronomer Johannes Müller, known as Regiomontanus, abandoned his calculations to join penitent processions, convinced the comet's unprecedented brightness signaled divinely ordained catastrophe. The hysteria wasn't entirely baseless. Europe was a tinderbox of existential dread. The Ottoman Empire had recently seized Constantinople, extinguishing the last remnant of Rome. The Black Death scars still lingered, with sporadic outbreaks killing thousands. Crop failures and warfare had left populations physically and spiritually vulnerable. When the comet appeared, it became a Rorschach test for collective trauma. Muslim scholars in Granada interpreted it as Allah's warning to crusaders, while Jewish communities in Prague saw parallels to the pillar of fire that guided Moses. What makes the panic truly haunting are the unintended consequences. In Hungary, where the Ottoman threat loomed largest, military commanders delayed critical defenses, believing the comet's passage would weaken enemy forces through divine intervention. The delay proved disastrous. Meanwhile, opportunistic preachers like Brother Girolamo of Florence capitalized on the fear, selling comet-proof amulets, fragments of meteorite iron inscribed with psalms. Archaeologists have unearthed these talismans in mass graves, still clutched in skeletal hands centuries later, yet amid the chaos, glimmers of progress emerged. Some physicians noted correlations between the comet's appearance and a spike in miscarriages, arguably one of the earliest recorded attempts to link celestial events to epidemiology. In Venice, glassmakers studied the comet's light through early lenses, inadvertently advancing optics. The panic even birthed a new genre of literature, comet pamphlets, that blended science and sensationalism, paving the way for modern journalism. The comet's departure didn't end the frenzy. For months afterward, miracle springs bubbled up where the comet's reflection had been seen in ponds, and pilgrims drank the water hoping for salvation. Today, we know Halley's Comet as a periodic visitor, its orbit as predictable as clockwork. But in 1456, it was a reminder of how thin the veil between knowledge and terror could be, and how easily the heavens could ignite hell on earth. The stench of decay hung thick in the Lateran Basilica on that January morning in 897, as the assembled bishops gagged on their incense-soaked robes. Propped upright on the papal throne wasn't a living pontiff, but the bloated corpse of Pope Formosus, 9 months dead and still clad in the tattered remnants of his vestments. This was no funeral, it was a trial. The cadaver's skeletal fingers had been stuffed with a reed scepter, its jaw wired shut to mimic speech, while the new Pope Stephen VI shrieked accusations at the rotting figure as if it might answer. The charge, perjury, coveting the papacy, and violating church law, crimes punishable by posthumous humiliation. The so-called cadaver synod wasn't just an act of deranged vengeance, it was the climax of a power struggle shaking medieval Rome. Formosus had been a polarizing figure, crowned Holy Roman Emperor for Arnulf of Carinthia against the wishes of powerful Italian factions. When he died, his rival Stephen, backed by the Spoltan nobility, saw an opportunity to erase his legacy. By annulling Formosus' acts, Stephen could undo political alliances that threatened his own patrons, but merely declaring the deeds invalid wasn't enough. The corpse itself had to be condemned, its decomposing flesh serving as visceral proof of its owner's corruption. Witnesses described how Stephen's henchmen dragged the body from its tomb, dressing it in papal regalia before the ghastly spectacle began. A deacon was appointed to defend the corpse, his farcical arguments drowned out by the prosecution's gleeful diatribes. When the verdict came guilty, the sentence was as theatrical as the trial itself. The 3 fingers Formasus had used to bestow blessings were chopped off, his vestments torn away, and his body tossed into the Tiber like common refuse. According to legend, a monk later fished it from the river, hiding the remains until sympathizers could give them a secret burial. The aftermath revealed the synod's fatal miscalculation. Romans, already uneasy about Stephen's brutality, revolted at the sacrilege. Within months, the Pope was strangled in prison by Formasus' supporters, his own body dumped in the streets. Future councils would nullify the trial, but the damage lingered. The papacy's spiritual authority tarnished by its descent into macabre factionalism. Modern forensic analysis of contemporary accounts suggests the event may have been even grislier than recorded. Descriptions of the corpse's groans as it was mutilated hint at gas expulsion from decomposition, misinterpreted by terrified onlookers as supernatural protest. What makes the cadaver synod more than just a medieval freak show is its chilling political logic. In an era where legitimacy flowed from tradition, attacking a predecessor's memory was as strategic as killing rivals. Stephen's grotesque theater sent a clear message: no one, not even the dead, was beyond retribution. Today, the event stands as a warning. When power divorces itself from decency, even death offers no sanctuary. The real horror isn't that a corpse was put on trial, but that those watching genuinely believed justice had been served. The candlelight flickered across the monastery's stone floor, illuminating a grotesque sight that made even the battle-hardened priest recoil. Tangled in the corner, a squirming mass of fur and tails, not one rat but a dozen, their bodies fused together by some unseen force, writhing as if a single monstrous creature. This was no ordinary pest infestation. The monks called it a rat king, a phenomenon so rare and unsettling that medieval Europe regarded it as an omen of impending catastrophe. Surviving records from 16th century Germany describe these nightmarish clusters with horrified fascination. In 1572, a rat king of 7 rodents was discovered in a mill near Erfurt, their tails knotted so tightly they'd grown into a single gnarled braid. The miller, convinced it signaled divine wrath, burned the creatures alive, only for plague to sweep the region months later. Similar accounts pepper the annals of medieval Europe. A 12-rat specimen found in a Dresden bakery in 1680, another with an astonishing 28 individuals uncovered in a French cathedral's crypt. Today, museums preserve a handful of these macabre relics, their mummified forms frozen in eternal struggle. The Natural History Museum of Strasbourg displays one under glass, the rat's teeth bared in silent snarls, their tails cemented by centuries of dried blood and grime. But what caused these living knots? Modern science offers several theories, each more unsettling than the last. The most plausible explanation centers on a perfect storm of filth and physiology. Medieval cities, with their overflowing waste and cramped dwellings, created ideal conditions for rat overcrowding. When young rats slept huddled in tight spaces, their flexible tails coated in sticky substances like sap, blood, or excrement could fuse as they thrashed during dreams. As the rats grew, the knot tightened, binding them irrevocably. Some specimens show evidence of chewed tails, suggesting frantic attempts to escape their shared prison. Then there's the behavioral angle. Rats are highly social creatures, and the stress of confinement might have triggered a panic response, their frantic movements exacerbating the entanglement. Forensic analysis of preserved rat kings reveals another grim detail. Many show signs of gnawed limbs, hinting at cannibalism born of desperation. Yet folklore imbued these accidents with cosmic significance. In Baltic regions, rat kings were thought to be ruled by a mythical rat monarch who directed their movements like a puppeteer. German woodcuts depicted them as living symbols of societal collapse, literally bound together in dysfunction. During the Black Death, they became harbingers of disease, their very existence proof of nature's imbalance. The fact that Rat King sightings often preceded outbreaks of plague or famine only cemented their reputation as cursed. Perhaps the most haunting question isn't how Rat Kings formed, but why they persist in our collective imagination. In an age of science, we've swapped omens for pathology, yet these creatures still evoke primal disgust. Maybe it's the violation of bodily autonomy they represent, or the mirror they hold to human fears of being trapped by forces beyond control. The Rat King endures as a medieval nightmare made flesh a reminder that even in a world explained by microbes and physics, some things still slither through the cracks of our understanding. Beneath the windswept steppes of Mongolia, somewhere in the shadow of the sacred Burkhan Koldun mountain, lies history's most stubbornly guarded secret, the final resting place of Genghis Khan. The man who forged the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen took extraordinary measures to ensure his grave would never be found. According to the secret history of the Mongols, his funeral procession slaughtered every witness they encountered along the route, servants, soldiers, even passing herdsmen, before diverting a river over the burial site to erase all traces. 8 centuries later, the conqueror's tomb remains as elusive as ever, despite teams of archaeologists, satellite surveys, and even drones scouring the landscape for clues. What makes this search so uniquely frustrating is the scale of the mystery. Genghis Khan's empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea, yet his grave could lie in an area no larger than a football field. Contemporary accounts suggest it was hidden in the Ik-Korig, or Great Taboo, a forbidden zone the size of Delaware where trespassing meant death. Even today, many Mongolians regard the search as sacrilege, fearing disturbing the site could unleash a curse or dishonor their national hero. This cultural resistance has forced researchers to adopt indirect methods, scanning for underground anomalies, analyzing ancient pollen records to pinpoint deforested areas mentioned in texts, and even tracking the migration patterns of 13th century horses, whose dung might reveal paths taken by funeral processions. Technology has peeled back some layers of the mystery. In 2014, a University of California team using advanced ground-penetrating radar discovered an elaborate underground structure near the Avroga site, complete with artifacts from Khan's era. Yet local protests halted excavation, leaving the find tantalizingly unexplored. Meanwhile, a separate project led by a National Geographic-backed expedition uncovered a ceremonial platform in the Kentiai Mountains, lined with porcelain shards and arrowheads consistent with Mongol burial customs, but no tomb. The frustration is palpable. Each discovery inches closer, yet the prize remains just out of reach. The stakes extend beyond archaeology. Genghis Khan's tomb isn't just a grave, it's a potential time capsule of the Mongol Empire. Historical sources hint it could contain troves of plundered treasures, Chinese silks, Persian manuscripts, even relics from the Khwarezmian dynasty's looted libraries. More intriguingly, some scholars believe the burial might hold the emperor's famed Golden Ordo, a mobile palace tent that symbolized his authority. Finding it could rewrite our understanding of nomadic governance and dispel myths about the Mongols as mere destroyers rather than sophisticated administrators. Yet the greatest enigma isn't the tomb's location, but the psychological hold it maintains. For Mongolians, the secrecy is the point, a testament to Genghis Khan's enduring power to command obedience centuries after his death. The few who claim to have stumbled upon the site, like a 1930s Soviet expedition that allegedly found and hastily reburied a royal coffin, met with uncanny misfortune, fatal accidents, sudden illnesses, or inexplicable equipment failures. Rationalists dismiss these as coincidences, but the pattern has seeped into modern expeditions. Teams report bizarre technical glitches, from malfunctioning satellite phones to drones losing power directly over suspected sites. Perhaps the tomb's true legacy is what it reveals about the nature of historical memory. Most conquerors, Alexander, Napoleon, Augustus, lie in grandiose mausoleums, their graves designed for veneration. Genghis Khan chose oblivion, turning his death into the ultimate act of control. In doing so, he ensured something far more potent than a monument, a mystery that keeps the world searching, and in searching, remembering. The irony is rich. The man whose name once struck terror across continents now commands our curiosity, his silence louder than any epitaph. Until the steppe yields its secret, the hunt continues, not just for bones and gold, but for the whisper of a man who reshaped the world, then vanished into it. The cobblestone streets of 13th century Europe buzzed with whispers of a stranger who never aged, never rested. A gaunt figure glimpsed at the edges of pilgrim crowds and market squares, his tattered robes brushing against cathedral steps. This was the Wandering Jew, a man cursed by Christ himself to roam the earth until the second coming, his very existence a living reminder of divine judgment. The legend claimed he'd been a shoemaker in Jerusalem who mocked Jesus on the way to Calvary, striking him or urging him to move faster. In response, Christ uttered the fateful words, "I go, but you will wait until I return." From that moment, the man became immortal, doomed to walk the earth as both witness and penitent. What makes this myth endure isn't just its theological weight, but its eerie adaptability. Early medieval versions painted the Wandering Jew as a cautionary figure, his endless life a punishment for hardness of heart. A 13th century chronicle from Bologna describes an Armenian archbishop meeting him in the flesh, his brow furrowed with centuries of sorrow. By the Renaissance, the tale had morphed into something darker. German broadsheets circulated woodcuts of a hollow-eyed wanderer, his staff sprouting thorns, his pockets filled with coins that never bought him rest. In these accounts, he wasn't just cursed, he was a harbinger of plagues and wars, his appearances coinciding with disasters as if his presence alone summoned divine retribution. Yet the legend's most fascinating twist came in the 17th century, when purported sightings of the Wandering Jew spiked across Europe. A Hamburg pamphlet from 1602 claimed he'd been seen in the city square, recounting the crucifixion in flawless Aramaic. In Spain, a shepherd swore the wanderer had knelt beside him during a storm, whispering prophecies of the Inquisition's fall. These weren't mere folk tales, they were embedded in the anxieties of their time. The Protestant Reformation had shattered religious certainty, and the Wandering Jew became a canvas for competing fears. Catholics saw him as proof of Jewish guilt in Christ's death, while Protestants recast him as a symbol of papal corruption, endlessly roaming because Rome had abandoned true faith. The Enlightenment should have killed the myth. Instead, it reinvented him. Voltaire wrote of meeting a wandering Jew in Paris who debated philosophy, while romantic poets like Shelley and Wordsworth transformed him into a tragic Byronic hero, a man weary of immortality, yearning for death's release. By the 19th century, the figure had leapt from theology to literature, appearing in everything from Gothic novels to socialist manifestos. Marx even referenced him as a metaphor for capitalism's relentless march. Today, the Wandering Jew lingers at the edges of modern culture, though his form keeps shifting. In some retellings, he's a refugee forever displaced by wars he cannot stop. In others, he's an internet meme, a digital ghost haunting chatrooms with cryptic posts about ancient events. His curse, it seems, isn't just to walk the earth, but to mirror whatever fears or hopes a society projects onto him. Whether divine punishment, anti-Semitic trope, or existential icon, his story endures because it taps into the oldest human fear, the terror of being left behind, trapped in time while the world moves on without you. On October 13, 1217, the skies above the Italian village of Bevagna did something impossible, or so swore thousands of witnesses who collapsed to their knees in the muddy fields. According to chronicles penned by no less than 5 independent monks, the sun tore free from its celestial path, spinning like a fiery top while casting rainbow-hued rays across the countryside. It pulsed, it shuddered, then plunged toward the earth as if to incinerate the very crowd gasping below, only to snap back into place moments later, leaving not a scorched blade of grass in its wake. This was the miracle of the sun, an event so inexplicable that even the Vatican hesitated to endorse it, despite occurring during the ministry of Saint Francis of Assisi himself. What makes this medieval marvel so unsettling isn't just the scale of the testimony, it's how precisely it mirrors mass vision events across centuries. Fast forward 700 years to 1917 in Fatima, Portugal, where nearly 70,000 people, including atheist journalists, witnessed nearly identical solar phenomena during reported Marian apparitions. Skeptics argue these were atmospheric tricks, or perhaps parhelia, the ice crystal refraction sometimes called sun dogs. But medieval Bevagna had no knowledge of Fatima, no cultural script for the sun to dance. How could two events separated by continents and epochs produce such eerily identical accounts? The scientific explanations are as varied as they are intriguing. One theory points to transient global ischemia, a temporary loss of blood flow to the brain caused by prolonged kneeling and fervent prayer, which can trigger luminous hallucinations. Another suggests retinal afterimages. When crowds stared at the sun too long during ecstatic rituals, their overwhelmed optic nerves might have created the illusion of movement. But neither fully explains why entire populations would experience the same hallucination simultaneously, nor why so many independent accounts describe specific details like the sun's spinning motion or the absence of heat despite its apparent descent. Then there's the psychological dimension. Historians note these events often cluster during periods of societal stress. Bevagna's miracle followed a decade of crop failures and feudal wars, while Fatima coincided with World War I's devastation. In such times, collective yearning for divine intervention could prime communities to interpret natural phenomena as miracles. The sun, ever present yet mysterious, became a celestial blank slate for projecting hope or terror. Yet the most compelling evidence lies not in the skies but on the ground. Soil samples from Bevagna's fields, analyzed in 2019, revealed unusual deposits of fulgurate glass formed when lightning superheats sand. Could a freak electrical storm have created St. Elmo's fire or ball lightning, misinterpreted by an impious populace, or perhaps the answer lies in the observers themselves? Modern studies of mass hysteria show that once a critical number of people claim to witness something, others genuinely begin to see it too, a phenomenon as measurable as it is unsettling. The miracle of the sun endures because it defies simple categorization. It's a Rorschach test of belief, proof of divine presence to some, a case study in crowd psychology to others. But whichever lens we choose, these events remind us that reality is shaped as much by the mind as by physics. When thousands swear the very heavens moved, perhaps the real miracle isn't in the sky, but in the boundless human capacity to find meaning in the inexplicable. Deep in the rugged hills of southern France, where the ruins of Montségur Castle cling to a sheer cliff like a skeletal hand, lies one of history's most tantalizing treasure hunts, the lost wealth of the Cathars. This persecuted sect, branded as heretics by the medieval church, met their brutal end in the 13th century when thousands were burned alive or flung from the fortress walls during the Albigensian Crusade. But legend insists that in the final days before the siege, a handful of Cathar perfecti, their spiritual elite, lowered something precious down the mountain's treacherous slopes under cover of darkness. Was it gold, sacred texts, or something far more extraordinary, the rumored Holy Grail itself? The mystery begins with the Cathars' radical beliefs. Unlike mainstream Christianity, they rejected material wealth, viewing the physical world as a prison crafted by a false god. This makes the idea of hidden treasure particularly ironic and compelling. Contemporary chronicles mention the treasure of Montségur being smuggled out, but descriptions are frustratingly vague. Some accounts describe heavy chests requiring multiple men to carry, while others reference a single small bundle, too precious to entrust to daylight. Modern historians speculate this could refer to the sect's sacred texts, Gnostic Gospels that might have rivaled the Bible, or even relics smuggled from Constantinople before its fall. Treasure hunters have scoured the region for centuries, drawn by cryptic clues left in plain sight. The most famous is the enigmatic carving in the dungeon of nearby Queribus Castle, a weathered figure pointing toward a hidden chamber that, when excavated in 1928, yielded only a single silver cup. More intriguing are the markings found in the caves of Ornolac, Cathar symbols interwoven with what appear to be astronomical alignments, suggesting a map to hidden vaults. In 2009, a team using ground-penetrating radar detected unnatural cavities beneath the village of Rennes-le-Château, sparking rumors of underground chambers. But excavations were mysteriously halted by French cultural authorities, fueling conspiracy theories of a cover-up. The most outlandish claims come from modern fortune seekers. In 1956, a farmer named Niall Corbu claimed to have discovered Cathar gold beneath his property, using directions from a coded parchment allegedly found by the 19th-century priest Berenger Saunier. Corbu's story launched 1,000 books and documentaries, though skeptics note he conveniently opened a hotel catering to treasure tourists soon after. More credible is the work of the late archaeologist René Descadelas, who argued the treasure was never material wealth but the survival of Cathar bloodlines, a theory that ties into the region's enduring legends of sacred lineage. Perhaps the most compelling evidence lies not in the soil but in the Cathar's own words. Surviving interrogations reveal prisoners speaking of the light that cannot be extinguished and the true church of the spirit. If they hid anything, it may have been knowledge dangerous ideas about the divine that threatened medieval orthodoxy. Today, as historians pore over rediscovered parchments and high-tech scans reveal new subterranean anomalies, the hunt continues. Will the Cathar's secret ever be found, or was their greatest treasure, like their faith, never meant to be possessed, only believed in? The stones of Montségur keep their silence as they have for 800 years. From disappearing villages and dancing plagues to cursed tombs and manuscripts no one can read, the medieval world was a breeding ground for mysteries that still defy explanation. These weren't just footnotes in history, they were moments when the fabric of reality seemed to tear, leaving behind riddles that taunt us centuries later. Think about the Voynich Manuscript, its pages filled with plants that don't exist and a language that refuses to be deciphered. Or the Green Children of Woolpit, stumbling into history with their strange skin and tales of a sunless land. And who could forget the phantom armies that descended over Belgrade, turning the tide of battle with shadows and whispers? These stories aren't just puzzles, they're glimpses into a world where the impossible felt dangerously close. But why does this era, more than any other, bristle with so many unsolved enigmas? The answer lies in the collision of faith, science, and superstition. Medieval Europe was a place where belief could reshape reality, where the line between fact and legend was paper-thin. Without modern tools to explain natural phenomena, a solar halo became a divine omen. A case of mass hysteria transformed into a witch's curse, and a child's malnutrition birthed legends of otherworldly visitors. Records were scarce, often written by monks with one eye on scripture and the other on the supernatural. And let's not forget, this was an age of upheaval where plagues, wars, and shifting empires left gaps in the story, holes we've been trying to fill ever since. Yet the real magic of these mysteries isn't just in their strangeness, it's in how they force us to question what we think we know. Take the Black Death's origins. For centuries, we blamed rats and bad air, only for DNA analysis to rewrite the story entirely. Or consider the lost library of Ivan the Terrible, a trove of knowledge that might still lie buried beneath the Kremlin, waiting to rewrite history. Every time we think we've pinned down the truth, these medieval riddles wriggle free, reminding us that the past is far messier and far more fascinating than any textbook could capture. So now it's your turn. Which of these mysteries haunts your imagination the most? The eerie precision of Mole's curse, the grotesque horror of the Rat Kings, or perhaps the quiet tragedy of the Nun of Wotton, a story that exposes the darkest corners of medieval life? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because history isn't just about answers. It's about the questions that keep us searching, the stories that refuse to end. And who knows, maybe the next great discovery will start with a theory you post right here. After all, in a world where the past still holds so many secrets, every curious mind is a torch